Hey everyone, Mario again coming at you with another review. It's another episode of First Impressions to a point. What I mean by that is I've seen several scenes of this film stand alone, and I've seen a bunch of tributes of it, but I've never actually sat down and watched the film proper. And the film, of course, is the classic silent film directed by F.W. Murnau and an unofficial, unauthorized adaptation of Bram Stoker's classic novel Dracula, Nosferatu, a Symphony of Horror. And that title is apt because it is. Now, I will say that the film has aged, and our concept of modern horror cinema is a lot different than what it was in the early days. So, most people watching this film back might not find this film scary, but with that in mind, you could still appreciate the film for its artistic value. Now, this is around the time that movies were starting to come into their own. The talkie era was a couple years away, so the acting style was really going to start changing soon. But this is where filming techniques were experimented with, something that would go on for decades afterwards, depending on what field you were in. But this is really where it came into its own. And watching this film, you can see a little bit of that. Probably not as much as other silent films. Like I'll say that The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, you really see a lot more of experimenting with film techniques, because that film is a straight-up German expressionist film, whereas this one, there's like a little bit of a vibe to it in certain parts, but it's more a normal film. But the cinematography in a lot of the scenes is excellent. Like, anyone who has even heard of this film but has never seen it knows about a lot of the shots. There's that shot where Nosferatu's going up the stairs and you only see his shadow when he's opening the door. Then there's that scene where he walks into the door frame and his body takes up the entire frame. And then, of course, that classic shot of when he rises from the coffin. Just the way Murnau and his cinematographers set up the shots. That's right, I said cinematographers, because there's two. I actually got to look over to read their names. There was Fritz Wagner, who did the cinematography for M, so 2 classic films under his belt. And then Gunther Krampf. Now, I don't know who did what shots. I know for certain, from what I've looked up, that Wagner did do that famous shot, where he's opening the door. But what Krampf did, no idea. I think he might have done some of the earlier stuff. I checked IMDb, it doesn't have an answer for him. Now, other than being a classic of silent horror, this film is also infamous for another thing, and that is, of course, something I've already mentioned, and that is that it's an unofficial adaptation of Dracula. Murnau and his producers tried to get the rights. Stoker's widow said no, so they basically gave her the finger and went forward with their plans. They just changed certain elements of the story, so if they got in trouble, they can't say, hey, it's not entirely like Dracula. That defense didn't work, though, because the estate sued and won, and the judge said, well, you gotta destroy all the copies of the film. And they thought they did, but several survived, and that's how we have the film today, which is a good thing, because it would have been sad if this film was lost to history. I mean, like I've already said, by today's standards, it might not be scary to most people. Now, if you were to watch this film as a kid, and this is where you actually start your horror film education, then yeah, it would be scary. And there are a lot of shots in the film that are creepy. I've mentioned a couple of them. And that's where the film, I think, at least for me, is it's more creepy than it is scary. Now, the sad thing about it being saved by copies being around the world already is that there are copies readily available to watch, but most of them are of substandard quality. Like, I watched it through Amazon Prime, and the copy that's available for free via Prime sucks. With a capital S. It sucked, this copy. It was kind of fuzzy. The night scenes were not properly tinted blue. Some of the title cards are wrong, so this was a bad copy. I don't know why they put this one up. Maybe it was the only one they could find that transferred for free, but it sucked. If you want to watch the film, you can find a better copy online. Find it. Like, I found one on YouTube, just Googling, that was a rip of the Blu-ray copy, and I'm like, I should have watched this copy instead of the Amazon one. But now that aside, it still was fun to watch. Like I said, I enjoyed it. I appreciate the film's artistic value, and like I've already said a couple times, it's more creepy than scary. On the Amazon copy, the only scene I noticed that the night scenes were actually tinted correctly was the ending scene. And even then it wasn't blue, but you could tell it actually is dark like it's supposed to be. All the other ones, hey, why is Nosferatu walking around in the daylight? Which adds another thing to this film's legacy. This, at least from the European vampire point of view, is where that whole thing about vampires being killed by sunlight came from. And that's one of the things Murnau and company had to change in order to try to do their whole argument. Because in the book, Dracula is killed by knives. And he can actually walk around in the daylight. He just can't use a lot of his powers other than, like super strength and stuff. He can't shapeshift. But here it's like, nah, we'll change it to daylight. Now, there might be other vampire mythos from different parts of the world where sunlight can kill him. But in the European one, they usually just hide during it. Because, they're creatures of the night. But in certain ones, they can come out at night. Like in Dracula, he can walk around in the daylight. Being sued, the company that produced it went bankrupt afterwards. So I think this was his one or only film. Now, I haven't talked about the plot, but not really much to talk about the plot. If you know the plot of Dracula, more specifically the Universal one, that's the closest that this film comes to. The plot of the film is that Count Orlok, that's Dracula's name in this film in its original version. Later, prints do restore some of the names. This one, it's still Orlok. He wants to buy a house in the city that Jonathan/Hutter lives in, and mine is Jonathan. And he's sent by Renfield to go sell him the house. Renfield, he's a little off at first, but he goes full-blown crazy by the end. So they combine the character that Jonathan works for in the novel with Renfield. And, long tradition with these Dracula films of combining the characters and switching them around. I had to start somewhere. Now, when Jonathan gets to Transylvania and meets Count Dracula, or Count Orlok, I'm probably going to go back and forth on it, you can tell right away there's something odd about him. He doesn't know what it is. But by the end, he's like, oh crap, this guy sleeps in a coffin. And he has to get out by going out the window with the old rope trick. Sheets tied in a rope. Now, Orlok, he kills the people on the boat that take him to the city. And we get the classic scene where the guy goes down below. The mate goes down below and cuts into the boxes, finds the rats. As the captain writes in his log, my crew is dead, I fear the plague. And then that thing of Nosferatu going up in the cabin, and just the look of horror on the actor's face. Now, with silent acting, there is a lot of physical performance, because, you're not actually hearing the voice, so it is a physical performance. It's like pantomime. If you were going to put this into a modern acting style, it would be very over the top and very energetic. But since you're just selling with body language, you have to be. And just the way this guy sells it, he's like... You could tell what he's seeing is scaring the crap out of him. And he goes up on deck and jumps overboard. Like any sensible person. Now, Orlok eventually reaches the city. Jonathan is back. And in the end, he is killed by Mina. Because as the Book of the Vampire says, only a pure woman can break the vampire spell by keeping him by her side until the cock crows. Or, as Blue Oyster Cult worded it in their song Nosferatu, only a woman can break his spell, pure in heart, who will offer self to Nosferatu. And I have to mention the long-standing rumor about Orlok's actor, Max Schreck. There was the rumor that this was the only film he made, and that he was a real vampire, which is very funny. And that's the reason why he was so convincing at it. Obviously, not true. He made other films, but the thing that I like is that his last name, Schreck, when you translate it from German to English, it means terror. Now, the thing about that is, you would think that would be his stage name, which that would be the perfect stage name for a horror actor. Max Schreck. But the thing is, that was his real last name. So, what a coincidence, eh? That Nosferatu makeup has become iconic. And the thing I've always noticed about it is that Nosferatu, Count Orlok, is associated with rats in the plague. And he does kind of have a rat-like appearance. His ears, his fangs are a little bit... He gets a like rat little thing with his mouth, little claws. And it kind of does, move around a little bit like a rat, but not much. But that's a little interesting. And looking at him is like, I know they really did the makeup really to sell that he's a vampire. Especially since it's a silent film. But if you were to think about it logistically, it's like, how does Orlok expect to walk around in public at night? But then again, He moves in the shadows, so I guess it works for him. And of course, that makeup would influence Count Barlow's design in the TV miniseries from the 70s of Salem's Lot. And it's influenced a lot of other vampire designs too, but mainly that one. And of course, the design they reused the design in the Werner Herzog remake from the 70s. Which, speaking of which, Werner actually considers Nosferatu to be the greatest film to ever come out of Germany. I will agree to him partially. I say it's one of the greatest ones from an artistic standpoint, but I'd say films like Cabinet of Dr. Caligari are better. And I think I probably like M better, but it'd be in the running. I can definitely see why he enjoys it. I think probably I might as a whole like his film better, but I gotta rewatch it. It's been 10 years since I've seen his. Now, as you can probably tell, Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror does come with my recommendation. You might not find it scary, but you should be able to appreciate its artistic merit, its cinematography, its lighting, its costume design, and of course the makeup on Max Schreck's Count Orlok and the way he conducted himself. If you're not the biggest fan of the silent films and the silent film acting, it might be a hard watch for you, especially since the first third of the film is a little slow, and it gets a little bit more fast-paced once Orlok signs the papers, and then it has to get through a lot of the novel source material quickly, but it at least keeps you engaged. It's like building atmosphere and then quick. Apologies for the weird angle, but I almost forgot a couple things. One, there is a Van Helsing analog in this story, but he really doesn't do much other than do some doctoring. And there is a weird little subplot about Lucy, excuse me, in this version she's called Nina, having a weird psychic connection with Jonathan, where she senses he's in danger when Orlok is trying to feed from him. It never explains how this is, other than, it being probably women's intuition. It is a weird little thing, and it's like, okay, that's an original thing. I guess they threw that in there, try to build off of her novel counterpart's weird feelings when Jonathan isn't writing, and also to give a reason why Nosferatu has a interest in her. Other than that, never really explained. It's a weird little thing. But it helps. Greta Schroeder does play it off pretty well, especially when she's like doing a little psychotic thing. The look on her face is like, wow.